All right, good evening and welcome everyone to our first webinar of 2017. This evening, we're going to be talking about technical writing, especially within the context of the Explore performance task. We have with us tonight Pauline Lake from Mobile CSP out in Connecticut, Cassie Beckworth with the Online Mobile CSP group, myself, Jen Rosato with the Online Mobile CSP group as well, and then our guest speaker. Hang on, I'm just gonna mute myself before I forget. There we go. And we have with us, like I was saying, our guest speaker, Michael from Hermantown, Michael Pottis. And Michael, let me just pull up your bio here. He serves as the Technology Integration Specialist for Hermantown School District here in Minnesota. He's a Google certified teacher with a secondary license in English language arts. He's taught language arts for over 12 years and has experience teaching AP courses as well as technical writing. He provides ongoing support for teachers in his building, and most recently he completed his certificate in educational technology from the College of St. Scholastica. So he's going to offer some of his perspective on supporting students to be successful with technical writing. He's taken a look at the Explore performance task and will be able to give us some that. And then after the presentation, there'll be time to ask some questions of him, and then hopefully we'll have some time to go through some student samples and show you some ideas about how the writing in those could be improved. So I will turn it over to you, Michael.
All right, thanks, Sherry.
Just a reminder, just a reminder for those of you who are watching through the YouTube page there, please go ahead and feel free to leave comments and questions at any point, and we will get to those during the presentation. Thank you. All right, Michael, now it's yours.
Thanks. Sherry must not have wanted me to feel too old because it's actually my 21st year of teaching, so not too old. But for 20 years before I turned to the dark side and went into the tech world, I was a teacher of writing, and I've taught it all from grades 6 through 12. And for the AP part of this, I taught AP and then taught concurrent enrollment with Minnesota Duluth, the college and the schools classes. So, and I actually taught a course for 5 years called technical writing. And then that was absorbed into our business ed and into our industrial tech and has kind of gone away. So writing's always kind of been my passion before technology. So hopefully whatever I go over tonight is helpful. I've sat through a lot of PD where you got nothing from it. So hopefully something comes from this. The slide deck is yours, and ask questions as needed. So I'm going to screen share my slide deck and let me know if it doesn't show up.
All right, sounds good.
Do you see the slide deck?
Yep, it's up there.
All right, so this is kind of, I'll just start with this and feel free to chime in with questions. So the English teacher in me, of course, had to start with a quote. I think you're going to find a theme with this as I go through that misconception for students and even some adults is that writing has to be fancy or some sort of a wow factor in order for it to be effective. I put the quote up there because I mean, ultimately, the goal of writing is to get your information out there, and technical writing kind of falls under that more than others. And so as I go through this, you'll probably see that a goal of mine when I taught technical writing was to kind of consistently be concise and to cut and to be as direct as possible. And so the whole goal is, you know, if you inform intelligently, it will be impressive. So the first slide here, I think what gets lost in writing, and specifically for student writings, if I learned anything in 20 years, is that they don't realize there's a process to it. And that so much of it isn't the writing part of it. There's the beginning and then the editing before you hand anything in. And so the look that of the arrows there is actually taken from a writing class at MIT. There's a citation down there on the idea that it starts with planning, writing, revising. And it's kind of a constant cycle of going through in order to make sure that your writing is what it should be. And the third bullet point, you know, I've always tried to stress to students is there's not a writer out there that just sits down and has this amazing epiphany where they suddenly start to write their masterpiece. Movies make it look like that, but all good writers kind of go through a process, and the professional ones are lucky enough to have editors who take care of that for them. So writing is a process that is important to follow. So I was just thinking of this assignment in particular. I don't know how much time the teachers here, spend on the first part, but in my experience with working with high school writers, that if this part doesn't get taken care of, the wheels can come off the wagon rather quickly. And so, the pre-writing and planning part becomes extremely important. And I always had students just generally answer these questions, and most of them are taken care of in the curriculum, but you'd be amazed how they don't always see those, and it's good to inform them and to remind them. And so it's the purpose of it. And, this really isn't, except for one part, to persuade. It really is to inform. The audience of this becomes incredibly important about whom you're writing or to whom you're writing. And there's even a section where they ask you, I looked at the directions to say, assume that your audience isn't as knowledgeable about the topic. And in tech writing, it can happen. If you start writing over people's heads, it's almost pointless and people get lost. The parameters of the writing task, that's laid out. I looked at the curriculum. I mean, it's down to the amount of words per section. And for a lot of students, that's a nice little safety line. It's something that they sink their teeth into. And it's important for them to realize that if it's only 100 words, the economy of words, the conciseness of words becomes more important. And then there's a 250 word one where there's more time and more effort and word choice can be put there. And then I put organize, plan, and organize again. I don't think a student can over organize. And there's a lot of great graphic organizers out there, or teachers can make it for themselves. I think it's a misconception that you tell students to organize your writing and that they just know how to do that. I think anything you present to them visually or anything that can guide them during that process will save you problems down the line. And so, a day or two of planning ahead of time is vital. So I was thinking about the writing here, and these are some ideas that are taken from the professor at MIT of Kelly, that when you get into technical writing, where people get lost often is in the jargon, in the word choice. And so students need to be cognizant of that as they get into it, to understand that not everyone knows their topic as well as they do. And students have a tendency to do that because they know their topic so well, they assume everyone else does. And that's by no means, the blocks there are by no means of the only items to worry about of acronyms and abbreviations. But there's a slide later on where it's mentioned that maybe a student could give their paper to someone else to read who maybe isn't familiar with the topic, and make sure that the content comes across, because no matter how pretty it's written, if the content is lost, all is lost. And so I just wrote an example there because I work in education. Education is flooded with acronyms and numbers and alphabet soup. That if I gave that sentence to someone who doesn't work in education, and MDE and 504 and IEP and campus and FERPA, what would that mean to them? And you would probably argue that if you're not a teacher, most of that would be almost a foreign language. And so if there's anything students should be cognizant of as they go to write, and especially in the technical world, and the idea of creating this app, is to know that you can't lose people, and that you have to be sure that, bottom line, your content is able to be followed.
I was just going to jump in maybe real quick, Michael, and remind teachers that when they're talking about audience, they can talk about the fact that there are these AP graders who are reading it, and they really have very little time to spend on reading each of these explore performance tasks. And so the clearer and more concise, like you said, that it can be, the easier it is for the reader to understand it and to be able to, give them a grade and make that an effective process for them. You do them a service by thinking about their time constraints and that kind of thing.
And absolutely, I mean, sooner or later, our students, they go out into the work world, and it becomes just as important there too. I mean, in imparting the information. So if you want to remind students of anything, is that they have to use very specific terms or abbreviations or anything like that. It's very commonplace in technical writing and writing in general that the first time you use something like that, like IEP, to put the actual word choice afterwards. And if you're unsure, you're better off leaning towards explaining more, as long as you have the words left to do it. You're not going to go over your limit, to make sure that your audience isn't lost. Because I don't know if you can stress to them enough that if they don't understand what you're saying, no matter how beautifully it's written, it's a beautiful confusion. And we're really looking to avoid that with writing. And so part of that pre-writing is to think about your audience and to think, where can I be? Where you don't want to, put it at such a low level where it's like it doesn't get your point across or make you sound like you know what you're talking about. But you also don't want to go over the top where you lose people. It's a very fine dance in writing to think about your audience and to try to land in the middle or the upper middle to make sure that whomever's reading it can follow and also understand what you're saying, but also know that you know what you're talking about. And I've rarely seen a high school writer who can just sit down and at a keyboard, no matter how much they think they can, who can sit down at a keyboard and suddenly have this just come out of them in some sort of an organized and efficient manner. Pre-writing and planning is of importance because without that, everything afterwards becomes an issue. Word choice. Beyond just jargon, there's also just how you choose to use your words. I mean, if you have 100 words that you get to use in one of these sections, all of them become important. And so former students of mine always remember this. I mean, there's certain words like things, a lot, and stuff. I kind of wish they weren't in the English language because they couldn't be more vague. If you use the word things in something like this, like what exactly would that be referring to? And words like a lot, I mean, what's the numerical value of that? Those words don't fit, especially in technical writing like this and computer writing of saying we adapted many things in our app. That's not going to work because what exactly does that mean? Now you leave your audience guessing, and we sure don't want to do that. Embedded in there is a handout. It's the one that's a link there. I have a variety of handouts like embedded in the slide deck, and then some at the end that kind of give some benchmarks for students to think about. And I would argue that now we're into the proofreading part, the editing part, because this would now be what you're looking for in your actual writing. And just say it. If you're saying things, what are those things that you suddenly worked on? You might as well be specific and let the reader know, because it shouldn't be a guessing game for a reader. A reader should be able to read this and become informed without getting lost in your jargon or not knowing what you mean by some of your word choice. And then we have students do this all the time. The second bullet of it, this, that, it becomes incredibly confusing during the course of writing. I was looking at some of the examples that Jennifer gave me, and there was a few where they were talking about a computer and they referred to it as it, but then they were to a company and then there was an it, and then there was a they, and then I'm like, who's it, who's they? And then in the English world, we're going from singular to plural. It can get confusing. And so that's important for students to go back through. And if you find those words, clarify. So we're getting beyond just like, jargon, vocabulary that people won't understand. Now we're into being vague. And again, if these AP readers are reading this, part of your service to them is to make sure that it isn't vague to them. And this doesn't require you being a grammatical genius. I've told students this 100 times. In the computer world, you can use the find and replace and so many of the word processing tools. They all exist. You can simply type in the word things and it will highlight it for you. Go through, see if it fits. If it does for some reason, I'd be shocked. If it doesn't, say what it is, and then you avoid the issues later on. Word choice. I put only the strong should survive editing because we're in the editing process here. Kelly had some great examples there of made arrangements for. I mean, you have 3 words there when really you could just use arranged. And the problem with that is when you do that enough, if you only have 100 words, what a waste of 2 words in so many ways. And it just becomes almost too long. Your writing becomes drawn out, like you have to take a deep breath to say your sentences. And then active versus passive voice. That's a grammatical concept. So I don't know if every teacher, is an English teacher, but if they were to click on that link, it gives a great explanation of it. When people get into passive voice, it becomes long and convoluted. And the sentence there kind of explains that, and the revision shows that you can just get to the point. And so many times students try to take themselves out of it and make it like some weird third person who's doing this work when they should just try to include themselves or the group. And those examples show it. I don't know that a teacher who teaches this has to like specifically say, oh no, that's passive voice. I mean, it's nice, as the English teacher in me would say, that's great. But I think anyone could read the 2 sentences and say one is too long and kind of dances around the subject and the other one gets to the point. And so now we're getting beyond just the words that you choose, but now how you're stringing them together. And I would argue that doing a lesson on this right now with students, if they haven't written anything, doesn't mean as much. Learning word choice and cutting has to be done with their actual writing. Solitary lessons about it don't stick. Students learn how to write by working with their writing. And so all of this would be in the editing phase of that kind of a cycle of writing. Be concise and efficient. There's just so many students that get into this that try to do too much. And the sentence up there is talking about it. And it's just another example of taking something that's pretty long and convoluted and, in lack of a better term, saying just get to the point. And you should cut thoughtfully, inform versus impress. Never use two words when one will do. But this is what you'll get. You'll get very well-intentioned students, though, that start cutting necessary words. They go too far because they want to say, okay, I have to cut, and now they scale it way back. There's still content that has to be delivered. And so it's important that students don't go overboard. Again, just like with word choice, you don't want it too simple or too far. Cutting, there's a happy medium. And the only way that they learn how to do that is there's a link on there that talks about how to do this, is some practice. And I think they'll learn more if they do it with their writing. And part of that editing process is to make your final product great, but you're also learning how to write while doing that. And so students have to be careful not to go overboard, no matter how well-intentioned they are, because again, your audience has to get the information. And if you're cutting vital parts of the information, it's not really helping your cause. I can't stress this enough, the three of them that are listed here, that students do this, that they read it out loud and listen to their writing. When I had students do this, and you can use technology now, I mean, you could read it to a screen capturing tool, and you can listen to yourself read it back or something like that. When students do that and really listen to it, they start to notice issues with their writing.
I would just really echo that as well. I have found when I write things that reading them out loud really helps me catch mistakes in the writing, or to better understand where sentences are really structured poorly so that it doesn't sound very good when you read it out loud. I found that to be a really effective tool. Oh, are you still there, Michael, or did we lose you?
Is that this app, this creation could go out to someone, and so that doesn't know it. And one of the assignments, I think it was letter C, was like assuming your audience doesn't know a lot about it. So I don't know if that's a family member, whomever it is, but the more that could then read this and say it doesn't make sense because they don't know anything about the topic, now we're back to pre-writing, and you have to scale back and think about your audience some. I can't stress that enough, and students have to get used to doing it. But after they do it a few times, they normally start to see the value in it, and they run with it, and they start searching out people to have it read to them, and it becomes kind of a thing. So I don't know, Jennifer, if you've taught this, so if you wanted to chime in at any point, please do. I just kind of went through and thought about the assignment and tried to break it down by its parts. And that first part of explaining your innovation or artifact, with 100 words, that's not tons, which is fine. You should probably be straight and to the point. And the purpose and the function of your innovation, I don't think there needs to be, if you want to, your students, a lengthy lead-in or anything like that. I mean, I think the 100 words is saying, tell us what it is. And I think students want to be very concise and direct, and that a lot of cutting could happen there. And I think for a first draft, that students should ignore the word count some, just write it. And if you're over 100 words, it'll be a great lesson in cutting. I think sometimes if students are always going up and checking their word count, they're going to limit themselves, or it becomes more about the word count and not about the content. And so, I mean, I've done assignments before where I've limited students and said, just write it. Letter B here, that a person unfamiliar with those tools and techniques will understand your process. That would seem to be a part where jargon, acronyms, pronouns, word choice, all of that is paramount. Like, it becomes incredibly important that you are clear there. And it would seem like that putting the audience idea in there is letting the writers know that it's important that this process then is understandable to a variety of people. And not to comment on this about it. And so if you wanted to chime in, I mean, it's the positives and negatives of your innovation is, these little that are well and tell you or your section C, and because it's a larger section, it carries some importance. There's more space to explain it. In my experience with high school writers, when they get into something like this, they get worried. Like if there's a negative, there's something wrong. They don't understand that part of the process of creating something is to have problems. Failure is learning sometimes. So they'll oversell the positives and undersell the negatives, and it's obvious and it's too sweet. And I don't know if they just avoid the negatives altogether. But I was reading one of the samples, and one of the word choice for something that was positive with it, you're like, it's that good. It's easy to try to use word choice where you're like, it's not perfect. And so that's something where I think if you want to work with students on their word choice of, sure, it's a positive, but boy, if you put too much of an adjective on it, now it becomes like you're a car salesman or something, and people will have a tendency to wonder if it is indeed that good.
I think I would second that and say that is probably, in terms of the positive and negative impacts section, that is a frequent mistake I see students making, is that they forget to include the negatives, or that they're very dismissive of the negative impacts or potential negative impacts of their innovation, and really focus on the positive sides and tend to think very highly of them. Students do get to select their innovation, and of course we encourage them to select something that they're interested in. And so I think that sometimes lends themselves to having a bias towards thinking really positively towards that. So unfortunately, I like what you described there, Michael, in terms of thinking about how positive are those adjectives that they're using, and maybe that's an easy fix to some of the tone that comes across in that one. And I just want to jump in real quick and also say that we're having some audio issues. So for those of you who don't know, we're in northern Minnesota, and we're in the midst of a bit of a snowstorm. And so the internet is maybe a little bit sketchier than it usually is. And so I don't know if this is, I don't know if it's anything we can control, but if there are things that you don't catch, please just ask a question in the forum, and we'll try to catch up to that here when we are done with the presentation.
Is the audio getting sketchy on my side?
Once in a while you're cutting out, yes, and I don't know if I am also cutting out too, but once in a while you are. So I'll just try to give you a heads up when you do, in case you need to restate something. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. I'm looking at D then. If we move on, this was the one that seems like even like the more technical part than so many of them. I mean, data consumption, production, and transformation. That would seem to be then an area to be incredibly clear and concise, and to worry about jargon and word choice and to be factual. It's almost like a gear change. Letter C was a bit more of a sales job, or a bit more where you had a chance to inform and be less direct, where they'd have to change gears a little bit. And that's kind of a neat part about the assignment in my mind, is to suddenly go back to the hard data and information. And, that's data. When you do that, it's meant to be concise, and it doesn't have to be flowery. People will want to see the information, because that's what you do with data. You get it, and it's not always, fun and pretty. It's information to be delivered, and students should probably, stay a bit more factual in that area. So the final thoughts, I put it there of just thinking of, I don't know that you can, well, you can, that's, here I am overselling it. You can, do too much planning, but I think many times we do too little, and teachers assume students can just do that. Like, hey, sit down and plan. It's just not always in their nature. So whatever you can give them in terms of some sort of a planning tool, or how you can work with them in groups, whatever that may be, whatever works for your students, the better. And to really, go through the assignment and say, in this section, who is your audience? What are the requirements? What's the purpose? To think section by section and to plan that out. And then during the drafting process, to try to think of word choice and less is more, to do your best, but to not, worry about the word amount. Go over and cut. I mean, that's part of the writing process for everybody. And then I think many times students just don't get the value of the editing process, of going through and making thoughtful choices. Does this sound right? Does it sound right when it's read back to me? To make those needed revisions. We had talked about, Jennifer and I, about how many days or hours were allotted to this. In my experience of teaching writing, the drafting, the actual writing part, however many days you choose to spend on that, you should probably do the equivalent in the editing part. It should be equal, because basically editing is drafting and drafting is kind of editing. They're kind of together. And so if you're going to spend 3 hours on writing it, you should for sure spend 3 hours of proofreading it too, because they kind of go hand in hand and both are essential. And so that's just been my experience of teaching students for 20 years of writing.
And so maybe just as a reminder for folks, you're allotted 8 hours at a minimum by the College Board for the final, not the practice, but the final Explore performance task. And so if you're thinking about, breaking that down in terms of those 8 hours, you could spend about 1 to 2 hours on that planning stage, and then you could spend about 3 hours on the draft and 3 hours on the editing stages with the students. And the lovely purple booklet from the College Board explicitly states that really is one of the roles for teachers in the classroom, is to help students, give them a plan to manage their time. And so I think this is really one of the areas where you as the teacher in the classroom can be very directly involved in helping keep students on task with meeting those time goals. And you have to be maybe a little bit more hands-off with the editing when it comes to the second Explore performance task that they turn in. But this first practice one that many of you are doing now or maybe just finished is a really good opportunity to provide feedback to the students on some of these writing issues or suggestions that you can give them to help improve for the final one.
And I'll just add in that editing process, don't forget their peers. I mean, if it's possible for you to do some peer editing, if they're doing this, I don't know if they do this in groups or if they do it individually, but to have another person, another group read someone else's, that's that person who, they have some knowledge of the assignment, but maybe not your topic. If you can get another student in there, and it's good for other students to see other students writing too. There's kind of a symbiotic, sharing of information there. And if somebody sees a really good one, it's a really good model for them to see. And so I think if it's possible, if it's allowed to let some peer editing take place, there's some real value in that too. And there's some learning that can take place on both ends.
Yeah, definitely. This happens to be an individual performance task, but okay. In terms of peers reading over and helping catch spelling or grammar, or this is unclear, I would have to double check the booklet, but to me, that's not where a student has helped provide content for the Explore performance task and wouldn't be, collaborating on it. They're really just more providing that editor function. And I would think that would fit with what the College Board would allow. I would want to double check that in the purple booklet for sure, but,
I don't want to get anyone in trouble. All right. Yeah. I just put some links here at the end because, if you're not an English teacher, you just don't have these handy. So I just went through, and there's a variety of them on kind of some of the content and some of the skills that I talked about. They're yours for the taking. Number 4, I think, is a great article that, it might be too late if you've already written it, but maybe, for a final one, to have students look at it. It really covers quite well what not to do, basically. And it's pretty brief. It's a couple of pages and gives some real tangible, milestones or roadblocks, whatever you want to call it, because students like to have, something that they can look at. That's a good one to go with. And the others that are listed on there are literally exercises where you can get them in and they can work on sentence structure. I would argue that it would be maybe when they have a draft and they can do the exercises in tandem with their editing. I just think doing exercises separate from writing doesn't help the writing. It just becomes an exercise. It's not the writing. So if you could do them in tandem and use them in that way, that'd be best. So that's basically like my overview of it. I hope it gave some ideas for people that they can use it. And then if there's questions or anything that you want to clarify, and maybe looking at the examples that Jennifer has will be something even better too.
Great, thank you, Michael. I think I'll go check the forum here and see if we had any questions from folks. Cassie, Pauline, if you guys were monitoring it, did anything jump out to you right away?
Pauline has been answering questions here in the chat window. I just want to provide a quick reminder, though, that there is a little bit of a lag, so we might have some questions coming in over here in the next couple seconds.
Okay. Any common concerns that came up? I know I was seeing that people were just about to start Explore number 1, and then some reminders that Explore 1 is the practice one, and so that really is the opportunity where you as the teacher can be very hands-on and involved with that one. And then for the Explore 2, you have to step back a little bit in terms of the submitting that for the College Board.
Yeah, I might just add that for the official tasks, there are some questions coming in now about submission, that the teachers should take a close look at the AP digital portfolio, which is where the students will submit their official tasks. So if you haven't done so already, you should be setting that up if you are teaching the AP course and have your students enroll and set up their student accounts, and they will see that there are templates and the submission requirements. So you get a sense of what they're actually going to submit and what it looks like. The student handbooks are there as well, and there's also a webinar. I believe all that was shared in the forum as some questions had arise from the teachers who are currently doing that. So if you haven't taken a look, this is the time to take a look and let students get familiar with it so they're not rushing to get familiar with it when they're actually submitting, right? It might take some pressure off of them. And you can also find the template that's there and provided.
And the time it takes for students to get set up with their student portfolio and stuff like that, that's not a part of your minimum 8 hours for any of the performance tasks. So we really recommend not waiting until the end of the year to do those. Just go ahead when you have maybe a lighter day or you've got some extra time with students to take the time to do that. And then, they'll be more comfortable with it and you can work out any access issues before you get to that point.
Another thing that came to mind is I just was reading about the AP CSP exam fee, and I hope I'm not opening up a whole can of worms that's completely off topic. But we do know that there is a fee that students have to pay in order to take the exam. Check out the AP CSP exam page for that information. I have reached out to the College Board, our contacts, to see if there's any programs in place to see if there can be waivers for that fee, so that way students can submit. There is a disclaimer on there, don't quote me on it, go take a look, about if they submit but don't take the exam. So I believe, not quoting this, I believe if I read it correctly, that if you submit a task, you are essentially pledging that you are going to take the AP CSP exam, the multiple choice written exam. And if they have to order a test for you and you don't take it, you're still charged. So just be careful about if you're submitting to that site, try to make sure that the students really are going to take the exam.
Thanks, Pauline. Okay, how about then we start or we take a look at some of those student examples and try to rework them. I'm gonna go ahead and do you want me to share my screen then, Michael, and then?
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Okay. And I have tons of browser windows open. Oops, there we go. Let me just zoom in a bit more. So the first one I picked in part because it's on Wikipedia, which I think is a popular topic for students to think about these kinds of wikis and online collaborative tools as a computing innovation. So I selected one student here who all of these samples were from students that were in my class this fall. And so just so you know, those are undergrad college students. Some of them were good, some of them were not so good, but they were very close to high school students because they were by and large freshmen. So I think that they're probably running into some of the same issues that your high school students will have too. This first one then was on the first prompt, just provide information on the innovation and the computational artifact So it's purpose and function. And this is the one, as you were saying earlier, Michael, that's limited to just 100 words, so it is a little bit shorter. I don't know if you have any initial thoughts or suggestions in terms of looking at this one.
Yeah, that was the one when I went through it that, they were at 90 words, but I was thinking there was spots where they could have cut because it felt like they needed to add a bit more too. It was kind of vague. Some of the word choice, of the immense amount of individuals. I don't know if that's if it's necessary to say that, or is there a number that you could put there? I mean, immense makes it sound, almost too much. And then, there's nitpicky things. The last sentence, if you look at it, it says, my computational artifact proves that although Wikipedia is not written by one author, but rather many individuals, the information is very accurate. In fact, it compares closely to Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, they're citing a source there, but that's a mouthful. The last sentence there is one of those ones that I think if the student read it out loud and really looked at it, it becomes somewhat convoluted and a little bit difficult to follow. And that'd be like a great example of rewording, turning it into two sentences or something like that. And so, I mean, that's the first items that kind of jumped out at me.
The other thing that I was noticing right away in this first sentence is that was in passive voice right away.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be saying, I researched Wikipedia as my computing innovation, and put that very much more in an active voice and a shorter sentence.
Yeah. And there's words like that and a variety of them that, if they read that, when it says anyone that is a member, I mean, you could really just say anyone who is a member, anyone, a member of Wikipedia can create an article to be published. There's ways to go through and kind of be a bit more concise as they're going through there.
Okay, let's move on down to the second one here. So one of the students selected Norton Antivirus as their innovation, and this particular one was for the prompt 2C, where they were supposed to explain a beneficial and a harmful effect that computing innovation has had or has the potential to have on society, economy, or culture. One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about this is students are supposed to be making connections to society, economy, or culture when they talk about those effects. And if they don't make connections to those, then they'll get a poor score. So they have to make a connection to one of those three components when they're talking about those beneficial and harmful effects. And so that is another trouble spot that I see students not doing in this particular part of the writing section. But anyway, looking at this one, so what jumps out for you right away?
Yeah, that jumped out right away was it had a fantastic impact on the computing world. That's kind of what we were talking about, maybe a bit of an oversell. Fantastic, it just comes with connotations. I think they could get away or be okay with just saying having an impact or a positive impact on the computing world. Fantastic gets to be maybe a bit too much, because then the next part of that sentence is that they're happy with it. So if it's fantastic, it would seem like you might be more than happy with it. And so that was, like, to me, a prime example of what we were talking about, that when they got into the positives, they were maybe a bit of an oversell at that point.
Mm-hmm. And I think these are vague things, right? It has made me very happy with it too. Yeah. It doesn't say like why you're happy with it, that this saves me money because I do not have to pay to have my computer cleaned every time it gets infected by a virus, and so students, I see them also having troubles writing specific examples that really illustrate their points about the beneficial and harmful effects there. And so going back to that vague wording choices and, just vague ideas in there, if they can offer those specific connections, I think that helps improve it. So safely explore what the internet has to offer. Well, why, how does it make it safe?
Yeah, and there's other parts going as we get further down, just like a personal writing thing, the I think that Norton has tremendous impact. I don't know that I think needs to be in there. It's your paper. We're assuming unless it's what you think. And so that's always spots where, it's not necessary. And it kind of, again, that sentence, because if they didn't provide it, then it is possible that a virus could infect your computer and steal important information. That becomes a sentence that I think, if read out loud, is a spot where we could either, could cut or, at least be a bit more concise.
Mm-hmm. And then I was just reading the sentence that comes after that too. Norton doesn't save your program's code, so there's some issues maybe with some apostrophes there, which always gets me. It's kind of like the there, and there issue, but simply looks at it and puts it back to make sure that it can't be used by an unethical employee to steal information. So what do they mean by an unethical employee? Is that a Norton employee that's not stealing your information? Is there a specific example of that having happened where information has been stolen that they can use, or is this the student just coming up with an idea that they put in there without really backing it up with evidence?
Absolutely. And then the last sentence has another, it's pretty foolproof in its design. Again, that's maybe a bit over the top with the word choice, and kind of piggybacking. They started with a kind of grandiose one and kind of ended with one too. Like this one has a lot of potential with some ironing out and some specifics, like, it's not a lost cause. I hate to sound negative. It's just one of those things that I think if a student really, went through and read it, or if they'd done pre-writing and it thought about like, oh boy, I might have to specifically prove something I've said there, they would have been better served.
Yes. Yep. I would agree. And so, in terms of like some pre-writing tasks, one thing that came into my head when you were talking about planning was like having students write out a concept map, and something like this where you've got specific writing prompts for each of these. So you have your innovation, and then you have to make a little section for data and come up with some ideas and examples, and a beneficial effect, a harmful effect, and then an example to go with each of those. I think it's very you can either come up with like an outline tool or a concept map that would really help lay out some of those ideas for students.
Yeah, and if those can be made by a teacher, there's plenty. If you go online, there's many that are just blank templates to use, and then it basically comes down to like the really old school claim, support, claim. If you're going to make a claim, you probably should have something to support it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a simple, basic academic writing principle. So.
Yes, and students do have to have at least 3 sources in their paper or at the end there. So those are ideal times for them to find a source that gives examples to back up those claims that they're making.
Sure.
Pauline, Cassie, were there any comments coming in on the forum that we can pass along or ask, or that people wanted to have addressed before I move on? Okay, maybe we'll just do one more on innovation, and on the data, so we can just talk about the data prompt a little bit. This one, there's 2 of them that are in there. I actually think the Yelp one was not as bad, but the OneDrive one was very short and didn't have a lot of detail in it. So again, the prompt was to describe the data that your innovation uses, how it consumes as input, produces as output, and or transforms data, and at least one data storage concern, data privacy concern, or data security concern directly related to the innovation. And sometimes students are mentioning some of these security and privacy concerns as the negative effects earlier, but they can be mentioned again down below and taken, provide more examples and that sort of thing here. So this one in particular is very short.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the second sentence that starts with the user sends their document to save through OneDrive. This is a good example of some beginning to become vague with pronouns. Mm-hmm. The user sends their document to save through OneDrive, and then the data is sent to OneDrive server where so it becomes somewhat confusing if it's the user or OneDrive, save it and encrypt it. It starts to get pretty confusing of who the they is and what's being encrypted. I think some serious proofreading needed to take place there.
And this, I mean, I would look at this sentence too and think, okay, well, this is a good opportunity for students to really expand in that area. And you can use, you know, sentences like, first, the user sends their document to the one, you know, who saved through whatever. Then next, the data is sent to the server, and finally, it's saved and encrypted on the server. You know what I mean? Those kind of sequencing sentences to help make it clear what's going on.
That's an audience thing there. I think they're assuming that everyone knows exactly how OneDrive, you know, works or exactly what OneDrive is. And so that's a good example to teach audience that what if someone isn't, you know, well versed in exactly what OneDrive is. That'd be a good place to be sure that they know.
Okay. Let me see. I think Cassie had a couple of comments to share at the end here. Let me just check in with both Cassie and Pauline and see if there was anything else that came through in the forum, if people had comments or questions that they wanted to ask. Looks like maybe we're doing pretty good. Cassie, are you ready and available then to make your announcements?
Yeah, hi everyone. I have a very interesting to deepen. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sounds good so far. I think.
So I'll just make it really quick then. Wants to jump. You guys can hear me. It is linked on. I'm cutting reminders. You can just go ahead and check out the agenda. Okay, so the first thing here, the program reminder for joining us. There's a little talk about therments.
You know what, Cassie, we are having problems with your audio going in and out. So maybe I can just jump over to the agenda and take a look at those and read them off here. Wait, oh, I know you sent me an email with them just in case, so. Sorry about this, folks. In case you have not been in the midst of a Minnesota snowstorm before, it really does have an impact on your internet connection sometimes. So let's see. Announcements that Cassie had were the updates to the College Board rubrics, that the grading procedure has changed. They the College Board released those new updates to the Explore rubric in December. We are very sorry that we were unable to release those updates sooner, but we're not aware that they were going to make changes until they'd been released by the College Board. For those that are participating in the research project, regardless of whether or not you're teaching your course in an AP format, we really ask that you take the time to review the changes to the updated rubric, as these are the ones you should use to submit student research data to the project. And we do look at those as part of evaluating how well students are doing in the course and whether or not they're learning concepts. So we really appreciate you taking the time to grade the student work using that rubric. There was an email that was sent in December that had the changes to that Explore rubric. If you didn't receive it or are unable to locate it, contact Pauline if you're in the hybrid program, or Cassie if you're in the online program. And then just as you review that, make sure that you are looking at the changes that have been made. Those are laid out in the information that was sent, and including information about how to upload the performance test grades to your gradebook and student information spreadsheet. And just, again, contact Pauline and Cassie if you have any problems with those. And then just a reminder to keep updating your gradebook and student information spreadsheet. That gets to be a lot if you leave it to the very end of the academic year when you're trying to submit grades for school and trying to get finals graded and all that. So if you take a little bit of time now to do what you can to get it updated, that would be great. It'll make it easier and for you and for us, so that we don't have a whole bunch of last minute end of course issues. All right, so just keep doing them throughout the academic year, as we know the end of the year can be a stressful time for everyone. And then the stipend, again, is just to honor your commitment and time in doing that for the project, for those of you in the research portion of the grant, and we really appreciate you doing that. And thank you for helping us with that. Online only participants, the meeting requirements includes the video task component. If you have any questions, contact your mentor or Cassie. That second video task component is coming up for the spring semester here. And then for those that haven't issued a midterm yet, your tokens are in your spreadsheets, and the grading is completed every Tuesday and Thursday. We typically grade at the end of the business day to account for time zone differences. If you don't see your grades in your spreadsheet by the next business day, so that means like Wednesday and Friday morning, please don't hesitate to contact us if you've got any questions. Cassie, Pauline, did I cover everything? Anything else you need me to go over? Okay, sounds good. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We hope you got some useful information out of it. We'll be adding the webinars to the website so that you can take a look at them later on, and you've got access to the slides and the agenda and student samples and everything, and exercises that you can look at later and use in your classroom as you feel appropriate. I really want to thank Michael for taking the time to put together the materials for this evening and then joining us here tonight in the Hangout to share his experiences with us. Thank you very much, Michael.
You bet. It was my pleasure.
All right. Have a great evening, everyone.